After 30 years of being childless, he begged her, "Give me a baby. I will give you everything, even my fortune. Hi, my most beautiful, precious, and loyal family. How are you today? This is your Mr. Peter. I love you with all my heart, beyond words, beyond time. You are my strength, my purpose, my joy. I carry you in my soul every single day. A powerful prayer for my family. May heaven's light forever shine on your path. May love cover you like the sky, and joy rise in your heart like the morning sun. May every battle turn into victory, every sorrow into strength, and every silent tear into a river of blessings. May peace rest gently in your soul, and may your life overflow with health, laughter, and unstoppable grace. No weapon formed against you shall ever prosper. You are chosen, favored, and wrapped in endless love. Thank you, my beloved family, for standing with me through it all. Your love is my miracle. Your support is my strength. With you I will rise again, and we will shine brighter than ever before. Never forget how deeply your Mr. Peter loves you. Please like, comment, and share every video, because together we are unshakable, unbreakable, and forever one. Let's begin with deep love, my beautiful family. The New York skyline glittered against the night sky, a testament to human ambition and power. From the top floor of Gibbons Tower, Anthony Gibbons surveyed the city that bent to his will. 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair that added to his distinguished appearance, Anthony's tailored suit couldn't hide the disciplined physique beneath, a body sculpted through punishing dawn workouts when most CEOs were still sleeping. Every aspect of his appearance communicated power, control, and uncompromising standards. Mr. Gibbons, the board members are growing impatient. His executive assistant, Miranda, stood at a careful distance, knowing better than to invade his personal space when he was in one of his moods. Anthony didn't turn from the window. Let them wait. Sir, this charity gala was their idea. Your absence would undermine their idea, he cut in, his voice sharp as a blade, to parade me around like a circus animal to improve our public image, as if I care what the public thinks of me. Miranda had served as his right hand for 15 years, long enough to weather his storms. The Forbes article called you the Iceman of Wall Street. The board believes the board exists because I allow it to exist. Anthony finally turned, his steel-gray eyes cold enough to freeze the summer air conditioning. Remember that, Miranda. She nodded, unfazed. The car is waiting. With a barely perceptible sigh, Anthony grabbed his phone and strode toward the elevator. Another evening of mindless small talk with people who either feared or wanted something from him. At 50, Anthony Gibbons had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. "Brief me," he commanded, as the private elevator descended. Children's Cancer Research Fundraiser, $2 million already donated from Gibbons Global anonymously. Your name to be revealed tonight. Key players from all major financial institutions attending. Senator Williams confirmed. Press coverage extensive. Oh, and Claude, the new art director from the Hospital Foundation, will be giving a short presentation on their therapeutic programs. Anthony nodded, mentally calculating the business opportunities this forced altruism might yield. Who organized this event? Small company called Tryon Events. First time working with them. They came highly recommended by the Morgans. His jaw clenched. The Morgans, his chief competitors, recommending anyone was reason enough for suspicion. The limousine ride was silent, Anthony reviewing acquisition documents on his tablet. The ache in his chest, the one that appeared every time he encountered anything related to children, was easily suppressed after 30 years of practice. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into an enchanted garden, twinkling, lights cascading from ceiling to floor like stars fallen to earth. Anthony stepped inside, and the room's energy shifted immediately. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and within seconds, people began gravitating toward him with practiced smiles. Anthony, Magnificent to see you supporting such a worthy cause, gushed Melinda Vanderhoff, her diamonds worth more than what most of the sick children's families earned in a decade. Melinda. He nodded coldly, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. For 45 minutes, Anthony performed his role. Minimal conversation, strategic handshakes, calculated donations. His gaze swept the room continuously, analyzing networks of power and influence with the precision that had built his empire. That's when he saw her. She stood across the room, her back to him, draped in a deep crimson gown that contrasted magnificently with her dark skin. Even from behind, something about her commanded attention, perhaps the confident set of her shoulders or the way people seemed to genuinely smile in her presence rather than performing social obligations. "Who is that?" he asked Miranda, who materialized at his side as always. "Chloe Tryon, owner of Tryon Events, the one who organized tonight." As if sensing his attention, Chloe turned. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Anthony felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a jolt of genuine surprise. Her face was a perfect arrangement of striking features, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that seemed to evaluate him with complete absence of the usual fear or adoration. For the first time in years, someone looked at him not as a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to overcome, but simply as a man, flawed, human, and accountable for his actions. "Bring her to me," he said, voice low. Miranda's eyebrow raised a fraction. "She's rather busy running the event, sir." "Did I ask for commentary?" 2 minutes later, Chloe Tryon stood before him, her presence somehow making the space around them feel charged. "Mr. Gibbons," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Chloe Tryon. Thank you for your generous donation to tonight's cause." Her voice carried a melodious quality, but it was the firm grip of her handshake that caught him off guard. Not dainty or tentative, but equal, as though she considered herself his peer. "Your first event of this magnitude?" he asked, making it sound more like an accusation than a question. A slight curve touched her lips. "My company is relatively new, but I've been planning events for the elite for over 8 years. The children will receive over $12 million tonight because of this event. That's what matters, wouldn't you agree?" Anthony wasn't accustomed to people who didn't flinch under his gaze. "I understand you came recommended by the Morgans. I've worked with several financial institutions. Does that concern you?" "Should it?" Chloe smiled fully now, revealing perfect white teeth. "Only if you believe your competitors' taste in event planners somehow reflects on your business acumen, Mr. Gibbons." A strange sensation spread through Anthony's chest, something like amusement. Before he could respond, someone approached, drawing Chloe's attention away momentarily. "Ms. Tryon, the art director is ready for her presentation whenever you give." "The signal," said a tall woman with a gentle demeanor, clipboard in hand. "Thank you, Claude. Give her 5 more minutes to prepare," Chloe replied warmly. "And have you met Mr. Gibbons? He's our primary donor tonight." Claude turned toward Anthony with a smile that held none of the intimidation or calculation he typically received. "It's an honor, Mr. Gibbons. The children's art program at Meadowbrook has changed so many lives. Your support means everything to them." Anthony nodded stiffly, unused to such genuine appreciation. Claude excused herself to coordinate the presentation while Senator Williams approached, claiming Chloe's attention. "We'll continue this conversation," Anthony said to Chloe, making it sound like both a promise and a threat. Throughout the evening, Anthony found himself tracking Chloe's movements. She navigated the room with effortless grace, giving equal attention to billionaires and waitstaff. When a waiter dropped a tray, she helped clean up despite her elegant gown. When a donor made a scene about seating arrangements, she resolved it without public embarrassment. He also noticed how she interacted with Claude during the art presentation, the two women clearly sharing a deep respect for the work they did with the children. There was something unsettlingly authentic about both of them that disrupted Anthony's cynical worldview. Near the end of the evening, Anthony observed Chloe slip away to a quiet corner, checking her phone with a furrowed brow. Something compelled him to follow. "Problem with your perfect event, Miss Tryon?" he asked, approaching silently. She looked up, startled, then composed herself. "Nothing I can't handle, I'm sure, though it appears your photographer has failed to appear based on the frantic texts you've been sending for the past hour." Her eyes narrowed. "Have you been watching me, Mr. Gibbons?" "I observe everything." He sipped his whiskey. "Especially potential security risks recommended by my competitors." Instead of the defensive response he expected, Chloe laughed, a genuine, musical sound that inexplicably warmed the perpetual winter in his chest. "Do you actually believe I'm some kind of corporate spy? That's rather dramatic, even for someone they call the Iceman." Anthony stiffened. No one dared reference that nickname to his face. "Your event," he said coldly, "while aesthetically adequate, has several critical flaws in execution. The seating arrangement places competing donors too close. The auction items are displayed with poor lighting, and your absent photographer means no documentation of the social elite's generosity. The primary reason most of them attend these functions." He expected her to crumble under his criticism. Instead, she stepped closer, the scent of her jasmine perfume startlingly intimate. "Mr. Gibbons, while I appreciate your expert event analysis, perhaps you could direct that brilliant mind towards something more productive." Her eyes locked with his, fearless. "Like examining why your company's environmental policy contradicts the very children's health initiative you're supposedly supporting tonight." Anthony felt like he'd been struck. No one spoke to him this way. Ever. "Excuse me?" Gibbons Global's manufacturing division in Southeast Asia released chemicals into local water supplies last year. Chemicals linked to increased childhood cancer rates. Yet here you are, donating to childhood cancer research. She smiled sweetly, though her eyes remained challenging. Fascinating philanthropy strategy. Fury and something else, respect perhaps, collided in Anthony's chest. Before he could respond, the program director called Chloe to the stage for the final announcements. As she walked away, she glanced back over her shoulder. "For the record, Mr. Gibbons, I don't need your competitors to form an opinion about you. Your actions speak quite eloquently on their own." Anthony stood frozen, watching her command the room from the podium, announcing the night's record-breaking donations. Her crimson dress caught the light as she moved, her passionate speech about children's futures drawing enthusiastic applause. He noticed Claude standing nearby, watching Chloe with obvious admiration, and for a moment, Anthony wondered what it might feel like to inspire such genuine respect rather than fear. For the first time in 30 years, Anthony Gibbons felt something, crack in the ice surrounding his heart. This woman had dared to challenge him, to see past his wealth to his hypocrisy. Instead of finding her impertinence offensive, he was inexplicably drawn to her fire. As his limousine pulled away from the plaza later that night, Anthony found himself staring at Chloe Tryon's business card. His thumb traced over the embossed lettering as an unfamiliar sensation spread through his chest. Interest, desire, challenge. "Miranda," he said into the car's phone system, "I want everything on Chloe Tryon by morning. And tell Johnson we'll be requiring event planning services for next month's corporate retreat." The Iceman had found someone worth melting for, but first, he needed to be certain she was different from all the rest. Someone worthy of the secrets he kept buried beneath his frozen exterior. Chapter 2, Dangerous Attraction. 3 days after the charity gala, Anthony sat in his penthouse office, a dossier on Chloe Tryon spread before him. The morning sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk as he absorbed every detail of her life. Chloe Tryon, 30, born in Johannesburg, South Africa, moved to the States at age 8 when her mother secured a position as a university professor. Full academic scholarship to Cornell, graduated summa cum laude, worked for elite event planning firms before starting her own company 2 years ago. Unmarried, no children, no significant debt, no criminal record, impeccable client reviews. Anthony frowned. The report was thorough, but revealed nothing to explain the woman who had dared to challenge him publicly, nothing to explain why he couldn't stop thinking about her. "Your 9 o'clock meeting is waiting, sir," Miranda announced through the intercom. Anthony closed the file. "Send them in." The boardroom doors opened to reveal his executive team, their faces revealing various degrees of apprehension. At the head of the table, Anthony remained standing, his presence commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, our annual executive retreat is 6 weeks away. I've decided to use a new event planning company." He pressed a button, and Chloe's company profile appeared on the wall screen. "Tryon Events will handle all aspects of the retreat. I expect full cooperation." Marcus Hendricks, his CFO, cleared his throat. "Sir, we typically use Sullivan Planning. They're familiar with our security protocols and—" "Did I ask for opinions, Marcus?" Anthony's voice remained level, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "No, sir." "Excellent. Miranda has scheduled an initial consultation with Ms. Tryon for this afternoon. That will be all." The executives filed out silently, and Anthony returned to his private office, trying to understand his own motivations. Was he merely intrigued by someone who didn't cower before him? Or was it something more? The way her eyes had flashed with defiance, the graceful curve of her neck as she'd walked away. At precisely 2:06 p.m., Miranda's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Tryon has arrived, sir." "Send her in." Anthony moved to stand behind his desk, choosing a position of power for their first private meeting. The door opened, and Chloe entered. Today she wore a cream-colored blazer over a simple black dress, her hair swept into an elegant updo that emphasized her distinguished features. She carried a leather portfolio and exuded the confidence of someone entirely comfortable in her own skin. "Mr. Gibbons." She extended her hand, gripping his firmly just as she had at the gala. "Thank you for considering my company." Anthony gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Ms. Tryon, I trust Miranda briefed you on the basics." She did. Chloe sat, crossing her legs with natural grace. An executive retreat for 50 people at a yet-to-be-determined location. "Though I'm curious why you've chosen my company after our somewhat contentious encounter at the gala." Anthony's lips quirked, almost imperceptibly. "Your event raised a record amount. I value results over diplomacy. Interesting philosophy." She opened her portfolio. "I've prepared some initial concepts based on what Miranda shared." For the next 30 minutes, Chloe outlined 3 distinct retreat concepts, each creative, thoughtful, and aligned with what Anthony recognized as Gibbons Global's core values, despite never having explicitly stated them to her. "Your research is thorough," he acknowledged, leaning back in his chair, "but I'm not convinced you understand the caliber of executives you'd be dealing with." Chloe met his gaze directly. "You mean people accustomed to luxury and used to getting their way? I believe the charity gala demonstrated my ability to manage difficult personalities." "Was I one of those difficult personalities, Ms. Tryon?" Anthony asked, his tone dangerously soft. She smiled, unintimidated. "You were certainly the most interesting one." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Anthony stood abruptly and walked to the window, needing distance from the unsettling effect she had on him. "The retreat needs to accomplish several objectives," he said, his back to her. "Team building, strategic planning, and reconnection with our company values. But most importantly," he turned to face her, "I need to evaluate which executives still deserve their positions." Chloe's eyebrows rose slightly. You want an event designed to test your own team. Precisely. Can you handle that, Miss Tryon? She considered him thoughtfully. I can design scenarios that reveal character and capability, yes, but I won't create something deliberately cruel or humiliating. That's not how I work. Anthony stepped closer, looming over her chair. Even if I doubled your standard fee. Even then, she replied without hesitation. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Gibbons. My professional ethics are among them. The tension between them thickened as Anthony processed her refusal. Most people would agree to anything he asked for the right price. Her integrity was unexpected. Very well, he finally said. Design the retreat according to your professional judgment. Budget is not a concern, but I have additional requirements. He outlined his demands: the most exclusive location, unprecedented security measures, exceptional cuisine, and, most challenging, a timeline of just 4 weeks instead of the 6 he'd told his executive team. That's half the time typically needed for an event of this magnitude, Chloe pointed out. Is it impossible? Anthony asked coolly. Nothing's impossible. But it would require extending my team's hours significantly, rushing vendors, and paying premiums for last-minute bookings. So it's a matter of money. It's a matter of respect for my team and realistic expectations, she corrected. We can do it in 4 weeks, but I'll need certain guarantees: full access to your executive team's schedules, immediate decisions from you when required, and you're making demands of me now? Anthony interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. Chloe surprised him by closing her portfolio and standing. Mr. Gibbons, I run a business, not a miracle service. If you want the impossible done well, these aren't demands. They're professional requirements. She moved toward the door, and Anthony felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Panic that she might actually leave. Where are you going? He asked. I don't work with tyrants, Mr. Gibbons, she said calmly, her hand on the doorknob. No matter how rich they are. If you want a yes person who'll sacrifice quality to soothe your ego, I'm sure your usual event planner will accommodate you. Anthony stared at her, speechless. In 20 years, no contractor had ever walked away from him. The sensation was both infuriating and exhilarating. Wait, he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. Chloe paused, turning to look at him. Expectantly, Anthony moved toward her, stopping close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Your conditions are acceptable, and I'll double your fee to compensate for the accelerated timeline. Something flashed in her eyes. Triumph, perhaps, but tempered with genuine surprise. I don't need charity, Mr. Gibbons. The standard rush fee of 50% is sufficient. It's not charity, he replied, his voice dropping lower. It's recognition of exceptional value. I don't waste money, Ms. Tryon. Their eyes locked, the small space between them charged with unspoken tension. Then we have a deal, she finally said, extending her hand. When their fingers met, Anthony felt it again, that jolt of electricity, of recognition, of danger. Her hand was warm, her grip confident, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to wonder how those hands would feel elsewhere on his body. The thought shocked him back to his senses. He released her hand abruptly. Miranda will provide all necessary contacts and access, he said, his voice deliberately businesslike. I expect daily progress reports. Of course. Chloe's professional demeanor returned, though a hint of color had risen to her cheeks. I'll have a detailed proposal to you by tomorrow morning. After she left, Anthony stood motionless in his office, trying to understand what had just happened. He had apologized, implicitly at least. He had conceded to her terms. He had felt actual fear that she might walk away, and beneath it all, a current of desire so strong it disturbed him. He pressed the intercom. Miranda, clear my schedule for the remainder of the day. Anthony needed to regain control of the situation, of his thoughts, of himself. Chloe Tryon was supposed to be a diversion, perhaps even a conquest. Instead, she had become a disruption to the carefully ordered world he had built. He picked up his phone and dialed his most trusted investigator. "Peterson, I need deeper background on Chloe Tryon, not just the facts. I want to know who she really is, her weaknesses, her pressure points, what matters to her." If Chloe Tryon was going to test his control, he needed to establish dominance. He needed to find a way to test her, to prove she was no different from everyone else who eventually revealed their price. What Anthony couldn't admit, even to himself, was that he desperately hoped she would pass his test. That perhaps after 30 years of frozen emptiness, he had finally found someone worth melting for. 2 days later, Anthony sat across from Chloe in a conference room as she presented her comprehensive retreat plan. Her team had secured an exclusive private island in the Caribbean, arranged for world-class chefs, and designed team-building exercises that would subtly reveal each executive's strengths and weaknesses. Throughout her presentation, Anthony found himself watching her more than the slides, the passionate way she spoke with her hands, the intelligence that sparked in her eyes when she described particularly clever ideas, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. "There's one more element I'd like to add," he said when she finished. Chloe looked up from her notes. "What's that?" "A personal assistant. For me." During the retreat, her expression registered momentary confusion. "Your executive assistant won't be attending?" "Miranda will be otherwise occupied. I need someone who can handle my schedule, communications, and particular needs during the event." Understanding dawned on her face, followed by something that looked like disappointment. "If you're asking me to be your personal assistant, Mr. Gibbons, that's not a service my company provides. I'm asking you to ensure the CEO of Gibbons Global has everything he needs during this critical event," Anthony corrected smoothly. "Surely that falls within your professional scope." Chloe studied him, her expression unreadable. "This feels like another test, Mr. Gibbons. Does it?" "Yes." She closed her laptop deliberately. "And I don't appreciate being manipulated." Anthony leaned forward, dropping all pretense. "Life is a series of tests, Miss Tryon. I'm merely accelerating the process." "To what end?" she challenged. "To determine if you're as extraordinary as you appear to be." The honesty of his answer surprised them both. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the air between them heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Chloe stood. "I'll manage your retreat, Mr. Gibbons. I'll ensure its success beyond your expectations, but I won't play games. If you want something from me, ask directly." As she gathered her materials, Anthony rose as well. "What if what I want isn't professional?" The question hung in the air, dangerous and thrilling. Chloe paused, then met his gaze with unflinching directness. "Then that would be a conversation for another time and place, when you're not my client and I'm not your contractor." She walked out, leaving Anthony staring after her, a strange mixture of frustration and admiration coursing through him. Most women would have seized the opportunity to flirt with a billionaire. Most would have tried to leverage his obvious attraction for personal gain. But Chloe Tryon had just established a boundary and walked away. Again. Anthony smiled to himself. The first test had yielded unexpected results. Chloe Tryon might just be worth pursuing after all. Chapter 3. Behind the Mask. The weeks leading up to the executive retreat blurred into a frenzy of planning. Anthony found himself creating excuses to attend meetings that normally would have been delegated, drawn to Chloe's presence like a moth to flame. "These security protocols are excessive even for you," Miranda commented one evening, sorting through paperwork in his office. "Is there something I should know?" Anthony continued signing documents without looking up. The Caribbean has its risks, and Ms. Tryon's daily in-person updates are also security-related. His assistant of 15 years merely smiled when Anthony glared at her. "Just observing, sir. She's quite remarkable. Manages your impossible timeline without complaint and somehow gets you to attend meetings you'd normally avoid. She's efficient," Anthony replied curtly. Nothing more. But alone in his penthouse that night, Anthony knew it was a lie. His investigator's detailed report on Chloe sat on his coffee table, pages he'd read repeatedly over the past week. Chloe's mother had raised her alone after her father abandoned them when she was 4. They'd left South Africa when her mother secured a teaching position at Columbia. Despite financial struggles, Chloe had excelled academically. She volunteered teaching art at Meadowbrook Children's Hospital every Tuesday and Thursday, a commitment she'd maintained for 6 years. No scandals, no leverage points, no hidden vices. Anthony poured another scotch, disturbed by his disappointed reaction. He should be relieved she was genuinely as she appeared. Instead, he felt frustrated by the absence of weaknesses. On impulse, he visited the Meadowbrook Hospital website. Their children's art program featured a photo of Chloe surrounded by young patients, her smile radiant as she helped a small, bald child hold a paintbrush. Something inside Anthony constricted painfully. 2 days later, his car pulled up across from the hospital. He watched the entrance through tinted windows, irritated by his own behavior. Yet when Chloe appeared carrying a large canvas bag of art supplies, Anthony couldn't look away. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, her hair in a casual ponytail, somehow more compelling than her professional appearance. "Follow her," he instructed his driver. Discreetly, they watched as she entered the hospital. Without conscious decision, Anthony found himself stepping from the car and following her inside. 20 minutes and 7 figures later, Anthony had established himself as a major hospital benefactor with immediate access to all facilities. An administrator led him on a tour that culminated at the pediatric recreation room. Through the glass panel, Anthony watched as Chloe sat surrounded by children in various stages of illness. Some wore masks, others had IV poles beside them, but all were engaged in creating colorful paintings. "Today we're painting our dreams," Chloe's voice carried through the partially open door, warm and encouraging. "What's the biggest dream you have?" "Going home," said a thin boy with no hair. "Playing football again," offered another child. "My hair growing back prettier," a small girl whispered, the sight of Chloe kneeling beside a child in a wheelchair, whispering encouragement as tiny fingers struggled with a paintbrush, awakened an ache so profound it momentarily robbed him of breath. This wasn't just about attraction anymore. This was recognition of something he'd spent decades convincing himself he didn't need. The children's faces lit up as they painted, momentarily free from the burden of their illnesses. Anthony found himself mesmerized, not just by Chloe, but by the transformation she created in the room. She moved among them with natural grace, offering encouragement, adjusting little hands on brushes. "That's Ms. Chloe," the administrator whispered. "She's amazing with the kids, comes twice a week, rain or shine, works with Claude, our art director. They've built something special here." Anthony watched as a frail girl in a wheelchair struggled to reach her water cup. Chloe knelt beside her, whispering something that made the child laugh despite her obvious pain. Something long dormant stirred in Anthony's chest, an ache so profound it momentarily robbed him of breath. He thought of the child he would never have, the empty legacy beyond buildings and bank accounts. "Would you like to meet the children, Mr. Gibbons?" "No," Anthony replied quickly, his voice unusually rough. "I prefer my donation remain anonymous." He retreated, unsettled by emotions he'd spent decades burying. In his car, Anthony made a decision. It was time for the second test. The following Morning, Chloe arrived for their scheduled meeting to find Anthony unusually contemplative. I received some concerning information, Anthony said carefully, about potential corporate espionage. Chloe looked up sharply. Involving the retreat? Possibly. He slid a folder across the table. One of our competitors is particularly interested in our new clean energy initiative. They've been approaching people connected to Gibbons Global. And you're telling me this because Anthony met her eyes directly. Because they approached you 6 weeks ago, didn't they? Chloe's expression shifted from confusion to comprehension. Is this an accusation, Mr. Gibbons? It's a question. She examined the fabricated evidence of a meeting between herself and Anthony's chief competitor, then closed the folder and pushed it back. No, they didn't approach me, she said evenly. And if they had, I would have told you immediately. Even if they offered you triple what I'm paying? Even then, Anthony leaned forward. Everyone has a price, Ms. Tryon. That's where you're wrong, she replied, her eyes flashing with indignation. Some people have principles, which apparently surprises you. She stood, gathering her materials. I've worked extremely hard to build my reputation. If you doubt my integrity, perhaps you should find another event planner. Sit down, Ms. Tryon. Why? So you can insult me further? So I can offer you $50,000 for information about my competitor's upcoming product launch. Chloe froze. Excuse me? Anthony removed a check from his jacket. Simple transaction. You attended their charity gala last month. You must have seen or heard something valuable. This is your second test, she said, understanding dawning. You're trying to see if I can be bought. Anthony smiled coldly. Everyone can be bought. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. Not everyone thinks like you. $50,000 for information that harms no one. Easy money for your struggling business. Chloe's laugh surprised him, genuine and without a trace of intimidation. My business isn't struggling, and if it were, I wouldn't compromise my ethics to save it. She walked to the door, then turned back. For the record, I signed NDAs with every client, including your competitors. I would no more sell their information than I would sell yours. She paused, fixing him with a penetrating gaze. But the real question is, why do you need to test me? What are you so afraid of finding or not finding behind my professionalism? Before Anthony could respond, his phone rang. The hospital administrator. Mr. Gibbons, there's a situation regarding your donation to our children's art program? Anthony frowned. What situation? The board is requiring us to close the program temporarily due to budget reallocations. The donation will be used for medical equipment instead. We're informing Ms. Tryon today. Anthony glanced at Chloe, who was checking her own phone with a furrowed brow. That won't be necessary. Transfer funds from my personal account to maintain the program. Double the previous donation. But, sir, the board specified. I don't care what the board specified. The program continues anonymously. He ended the call to find Chloe staring at her phone, distress evident in her expression. Problem? He asked innocently. I need to reschedule our afternoon meeting, she said, her voice tight. An important personal commitment may be cancelled. The Children's Hospital Art Program, Anthony stated. Chloe's head snapped up. How did you know? It's my business to know things about people who work for me. Her eyes narrowed. Have you been investigating me? Thoroughly. Instead of outrage, Chloe merely looked tired. Of course you have. And the hospital program? Is that you're doing too? Some elaborate third test of my character? Anthony considered lying, but something compelled honesty. Yes, but I've already rectified it. The program will continue. Playing with children's emotions to test me, she said quietly. That's a new low, even for someone called the Iceman. The disappointment in her voice cut deeper than Anthony expected. The children were never at risk. It was merely a scenario to observe your reaction. Those children aren't lab rats. They're vulnerable human beings who depend on consistency. She shook her head. Do you have any idea what it means to them to have something to look forward to create when so much is being destroyed inside them? Anthony thought of the small girl in the wheelchair, of the fragile boy who dreamed of simply going home. For the first time, he truly considered the impact of his actions beyond his immediate objectives. I didn't consider that aspect. No, you wouldn't. Chloe gathered her things. Our afternoon meeting stands. I'm professional enough to separate my feelings from my obligations. As she reached for the door, Anthony found himself speaking without premeditation. I was at the hospital yesterday. Chloe turned, surprised. What? I saw you with the children. He hesitated, unaccustomed to vulnerability. You were teaching them to paint their dreams. Something shifted in her expression. Guardedness giving way to curiosity. Why were you there? Anthony couldn't answer truthfully, couldn't admit he'd followed her, watched her, been moved by her genuine goodness. Instead, he gestured to the corporate art on his walls. I have an interest in art therapy, he lied smoothly. Your program was recommended. Chloe studied him, clearly unconvinced. The great Anthony Gibbons, secretly interested in finger painting with sick children. Somehow I doubt that. There's a great deal about me you don't know, Miss Tryon. Clearly. She hesitated, then added softly, just as there's apparently a great deal about me you're determined to discover through these tests, rather than simply asking. With that she left, closing the door quietly behind her. Anthony stood motionless, unsettled by the encounter. Chloe Tryon had passed his second test with flying colors, yet instead of satisfaction, he felt shame. The weight of her disappointment lingered in the room, heavier than any business failure he'd ever experienced. For the first time in decades, Anthony Gibbons questioned his own methods, his own heart. The Iceman's perfectly constructed world had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been, might still become, if he could find the courage to thaw. Chapter 4. Forbidden Passion. The Caribbean sun blazed overhead as Anthony's private jet touched down on the small island that would host the executive retreat. He stood at the plane's window, watching the welcoming party assemble on the tarmac. His focus remained fixed on one figure, Chloe in a simple white sundress, clipboard in hand, hair lifting gently in the tropical breeze. 3 weeks had passed since their confrontation over his hospital test. Their interactions had been strictly professional, though the tension between them had only intensified with each meeting. Every accidental brush of fingers exchanging documents, every held gaze that lasted a fraction too long, each moment added to a current of electricity that both avoided acknowledging. "We've landed, sir," Miranda reminded him unnecessarily. Anthony straightened his tie, instinctively adjusting the armor he wore against the world. "You have everything under control." "Here?" "Of course." Miranda's knowing smile irritated him. "Miss Tryon has been remarkably thorough. The resort is secured, schedules distributed, and all activities prepared." As Anthony descended the plane steps, the humid heat enveloped him like a physical touch. Chloe stepped forward, professional smile firmly in place. "Welcome to Isla Paradiso, Mr. Gibbons. I trust your flight was comfortable." "Adequate," he replied, aware of his executives watching their interaction closely. "Is everything prepared?" "Of course." She matched his cool tone, though something flickered in her eyes when they met his. "Your villa is ready, and the welcome reception begins at sunset. The itinerary for the week is in your welcome package." Their fingers brushed as she handed him a leather portfolio. Even that fleeting contact sent electricity surging through Anthony's body. Her eyes momentarily widened, confirming she'd felt it too before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Martin will show you to your accommodations," she said, gesturing to a waiting attendant. "And where are you staying, Miss Tryon?" Anthony asked, keeping his tone deliberately casual. "The staff wing near the event spaces. If you need anything at all, extension 712 will reach me directly." Over the next 2 days, Anthony watched Chloe orchestrate the retreat with flawless precision. Team-building exercises subtly revealed which executives worked well under pressure and which crumbled. Strategic planning sessions distinguished the visionaries from the followers. All the while, Chloe moved through the events like a conductor, anticipating needs, solving problems before they arose, and maintaining a professional distance from Anthony that both relieved and frustrated him. On the third evening, Anthony noticed Marcus Hendricks, his CFO, cornering Chloe at the cocktail reception. Their conversation appeared tense, with Marcus standing too close, his hand touching her arm in a way that seemed unnecessarily familiar. Before Anthony could process his reaction, he was crossing the room. "Ms. Tryon," he interrupted smoothly. "A moment of your time to discuss tomorrow's agenda?" Relief flashed briefly in her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Gibbons." He guided her away, his hand hovering near but not touching the small of her back. When they reached a private corner of the terrace, she exhaled slowly. "Thank you for the rescue." Mr. Hendricks was being rather persistent. "About what?" Anthony asked, surprising himself with the sharp edge to his voice. Chloe hesitated. "He received a job offer yesterday from Reynolds Corp, my chief competitor. Yes, he wanted my opinion on whether he should take it." She met Anthony's eyes directly. He also wanted to know if I'd be interested in coming with him as their exclusive event coordinator. Anthony felt ice form in his veins. "And your response?" "That I don't discuss my client relationships with other clients, and I certainly don't engage in corporate poaching." She sipped her champagne. "I believe that constitutes passing your third test, Mr. Gibbons." Anthony blinked. "You think I arranged this? Had Hendricks approach you? Didn't you?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It seemed like your style, using a third party to see if I could be lured away." "No," Anthony said, genuine anger coloring his voice. "Hendricks is acting entirely on his own, and I'll deal with him accordingly." Chloe studied his face, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. You seem surprised." "I am." She smiled slightly. "It's actually nice to know you don't control absolutely everything." A comfortable silence fell between them as they looked out over the moonlit ocean. Anthony found himself oddly content in her presence, the constant tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Why do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Do what? The hospital, the children's art program. It can't be financially rewarding." Chloe's expression softened. "Not everything valuable can be measured in dollars, Mr. Gibbons." "Anthony," he said impulsively, "when we're alone at least." She considered this, then nodded. Anthony. His name on her lips sent a wave of warmth through him. "I do it because those children need something that belongs to them when everything else is being taken away. Their health, their normal lives, sometimes even their hair and their dignity. It gives them control in a situation where they have none." Her passion rendered her even more beautiful, her eyes bright with conviction. Anthony found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by a force he couldn't name. "And what about you, Anthony?" she asked softly. "What do you do when you're not building empires or testing people's loyalty?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked about his personal life in years. He'd made it clear such inquiries were unwelcome. "I work," he answered honestly. "That's it. No hobbies, no passions." Anthony thought of his empty penthouse, his solitary evenings reviewing contracts and acquisition reports. "Work is my passion. I don't believe that's the whole story," Chloe said gently. "No one becomes as successful as you without driving forces beneath the surface. Before Anthony could formulate a response, the sky opened in a sudden tropical downpour. Guests scattered, rushing inside as rain lashed the terrace. Without thinking, Anthony grabbed Chloe's hand and pulled her towards shelter. They ended up in a secluded gazebo, partially protected from the deluge, but already soaked. Chloe laughed, the sound bright and genuine as she wrung water from her hair. Raindrops clung to her eyelashes and traced paths down her neck to the now transparent silk of her blouse. Anthony stopped breathing. The sight of her, vibrant, beautiful, genuine, struck him with physical force. The weight of restraint he'd carried for weeks, for years if he was honest with himself, suddenly seemed unbearable. "I should get back," Chloe said suddenly, aware of his intense gaze and their isolation. "The guests will need—" "They're fine," Anthony interrupted, stepping closer. "Miranda will handle it." Lightning flashed, illuminating the uncertainty in Chloe's eyes. "Anthony, we shouldn't—" "I know." Another step closer. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. Instead, her eyes dropped to his lips, her breath quickening. "This is unprofessional," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Absolutely," he agreed, close enough now to feel the heat radiating from her rain-chilled skin. Weeks of suppressed tension, of carefully maintained distances and professional facades, crumbled in an instant. The storm outside merely echoed the unbreaking free within them both. Anthony closed the final distance between them, his lips finding hers with surprising gentleness, a question rather than a demand. Chloe's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she responded, her mouth opening to his with a soft sigh that nearly undid him. What began as tentative exploration quickly blazed into desperate need. 30 years of emotional ice melted in the heat of her touch as Anthony backed her against a pillar, lifting her easily. Chloe's legs wrapped around his waist, her hands tangling in his hair as their kisses grew deeper, hungrier. "We can't do this here," she gasped when his lips moved to her throat. "My villa," Anthony managed, reluctantly setting her down. "Now!" They ran through the rain, dodging pathways where retreat attendees might see them. By the time they reached his private villa, they were drenched again, laughing and breathless. The door had barely closed before they collided again, hands frantically removing wet clothing, mouths exploring newly revealed skin. Anthony lifted Chloe onto the marble countertop, his normally ordered mind consumed by primal need. She was fire in his arms, responsive and unrestrained, meeting his passion with equal fervor. "Are you sure?" he asked, hovering at the threshold of no return. Chloe answered by pulling him closer, whispering his name against his lips as they finally surrendered to the chemistry that had simmered between them since their first meeting. Hours later, Anthony watched Chloe sleep in his bed, her face peaceful in repose, one hand resting possessively on his chest. The unfamiliar contentment he felt terrified him. Sex was nothing new. He'd had countless beautiful women over the years. But this sense of connection, of having found something long missing, this was dangerous. As dawn broke, panic seized him. Not because the night had meant nothing, but because it had meant everything. The enormity of what he felt for her terrified him more than any business rival ever had. He thought of the future she deserved. Children, family, a complete man who could give her everything. His hand unconsciously moved to his lower abdomen, the site of the youthful injury that had rendered him infertile. The reminder of his fundamental brokenness hardened his resolve. Better to end this now, before she developed expectations he couldn't fulfill, before he grew any more attached to something he would inevitably lose. The familiar armor of coldness slid back into place, his protection against a lifetime of potential rejection. Carefully extracting himself, Anthony moved to the window, watching the storm continue its assault on the tropical landscape. For decades, he had built his life around the certainty that he would never have a family, never pass on his name or legacy. His infertility had shaped every decision, every relationship, or lack thereof. Chloe stirred, reaching for him in her sleep. The gesture pierced Anthony's heart. She was young, beautiful, kind, everything a man could want. Eventually, she would want children. They all did. And he could never give her that. When Chloe woke an hour later, Anthony was dressed in a crisp suit, reviewing documents at the villa's desk, as if nothing had happened between them. "Good morning," she said softly, pulling the sheet around her. "I should probably get back to my room before anyone notices I'm missing." Anthony didn't look up from his papers. That would be best. She frowned at his cold tone. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine." He signed a document with deliberate precision. "Last night was enjoyable. A momentary lapse in professional judgment we should not repeat." Chloe stared at him, hurt blossoming in her eyes. "I see. I trust you can be discreet. It would be unfortunate if the staff or executives became aware of our indiscretion." She slipped from the bed, gathering her still damp clothes with as much dignity as possible. Of course, heaven forbid anyone think the great Anthony Gibbons might have actual human feelings. The barb struck true, but Anthony maintained his impassive expression. "I've been called worse." Chloe dressed quickly, her earlier warmth replaced by rigid formality. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Gibbons?" The return to his surname was a clear statement. Anthony forced himself to look at her directly, to witness the damage he was inflicting. "No, Miss Tryon, that will be all." She left without another word, closing the door so quietly it was more devastating than a slam would have been. Anthony remained motionless until he was certain she was gone, then hurled his crystal whiskey glass against the wall, watching it shatter like the fleeting moment of connection he'd just deliberately destroyed. It was better this way, he told himself, even as the emptiness in his chest expanded to consume him. Kinder to push her away now than later, when disappointment would be inevitable, when she learned the truth that he could never give her children, never offer her the future she deserved. But as Anthony stared at the broken glass scattered across the floor, the truth he couldn't admit even to himself whispered in the hollow spaces of his heart. For the first time in 30 years, he had found someone worth risking everything for, and in his fear he had pushed her away before she could reject him, for the one failure he could never overcome. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Truth. The Gibbons. Global headquarters felt colder than usual as Anthony strode through the corridors 2 weeks after the retreat. Executives scattered from his path. The retreat, having reinforced rather than softened his fearsome reputation. His mood had darkened to dangerous levels. Even Miranda treaded carefully around him. In his office sanctuary, Anthony loosened his tie and stared at the Manhattan skyline. Patches of blue broke through retreating clouds outside, but inside him, the storm intensified daily. The memory of Chloe in his arms haunted his nights. Her wounded expression as she'd left his villa haunted his days. "Sir," Miranda's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Tryon is here with the post-retreat report." Anthony's pulse quickened traitorously. "Send her in." Chloe entered, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that emphasized her elegant posture. Nothing about her appearance betrayed their night together, except the careful way she avoided direct eye contact. "The final report," she said, placing a bound document on his desk without approaching any closer than necessary. "All objectives were met or exceeded. The participant surveys indicate a 93% satisfaction rate." "Impressive," Anthony said, not touching the report. "Your final invoice?" "Already submitted to accounting." Chloe finally met his gaze, her expression professionally detached. "If there's nothing else, this concludes our contract." The finality in her tone triggered an alarm in Anthony's mind. He wasn't ready for this to be the end, despite his own actions pushing her away. "There will be other events," he said, "the words sounding hollow even to himself. I'm afraid Tryon events won't be available. Her professional smile never reached her eyes. We're expanding internationally. I'll be relocating to London next month. The news hit Anthony like a physical blow, though he maintained his impassive expression. London? Yes, I've been offered an exclusive partnership with Harrington Worldwide. Given recent developments, it seemed prudent to accept. The implication was clear. She was leaving because of him, because of what happened, and what didn't happen. I see. Anthony stood, moving to the window to hide the emotion threatening to crack his careful facade. Congratulations. Harrington is fortunate to have you. Thank you. Her voice softened slightly. I appreciate the opportunity to have worked with Gibbons Global. The formality between them was unbearable. Anthony turned, prepared to say something, anything, to break through it when his phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital administrator. With an apologetic glance at Chloe, he answered. Mr. Gibbons, I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation regarding Ms. Tryon's mother. Anthony's attention sharpened instantly. What's happened? She collapsed during her lecture this morning. She's stable, but the oncology team has discovered her cancer has returned. More aggressive this time. They're recommending immediate treatment, but her insurance has denied coverage for the experimental protocol they believe is her best chance. Anthony glanced at Chloe, who was gathering her things, unaware of the conversation's content. Make whatever arrangements are necessary, he instructed quietly. The best specialists, any treatment protocol recommended, I'll cover all expenses. Sir, we're talking about potentially millions. Did I ask for a cost analysis? Anthony interrupted coldly. Handle it anonymously. I don't want Miss Tryon or her mother to know the source. Yes, sir. We'll need to create some sort of explanation. A medical charity lottery. Make it convincing. Anthony ended the call to find Chloe watching him with subtle suspicion. Is everything all right? She asked. Fine. Just business. The lie came easily, though it left a bitter taste. You were leaving. She nodded, moving toward the door. Goodbye, Mr. Gibbons. As the door closed behind her, Anthony sank into his chair, the emptiness in his chest expanding. He'd done the right thing pushing her away, hadn't he? She deserved someone whole, someone who could give her children, a family, not a broken man whose frozen heart had only barely begun to thaw. For the next 3 weeks, Anthony threw himself into work with renewed fervor, staying at the office until midnight, demanding the impossible from his team. He fired Marcus Hendricks publicly, making an example of his disloyalty. The whispers about the Iceman grew darker, his reputation more fearsome than ever. But at night, alone in his penthouse, Anthony found himself staring at the hospital's children's art program webpage, at photos of Chloe with her young students. In these unguarded moments, the mask slipped, revealing the profound emptiness her absence had created. It was during one such evening that his security team called. Sir, there's been a breach at headquarters. Someone accessed the executive server. From the basement security office, Anthony frowned. Do we have them on camera? Yes, sir, it's Ms. Tryon. Anthony was already reaching for his coat. I'm on my way. When he arrived, he found Chloe being detained in the security office, her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. Leave us, Anthony commanded the security team, who quickly complied. Alone, they faced each other across the small room, the tension electric between them. Corporate espionage, after all, Anthony asked, his voice deceptively calm. No, Chloe lifted her chin. I was checking the security footage from 3 weeks ago, the day my mother mysteriously won a non-existent medical charity lottery that's covering her experimental cancer treatment. Anthony's expression remained impassive, though inwardly he cursed his oversight. Of course she would investigate. She was too intelligent not to question such convenient timing. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." Chloe's voice trembled with emotion. "I saw you on the footage, meeting with the hospital administrator the day before they called my mother. The same day you took that mysterious phone call in your office." She stepped closer, her gaze penetrating the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. "Why? Why would you do that for me, after making it crystal clear at the retreat that I meant nothing to you?" The vulnerability in her question cracked something inside Anthony. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, Chloe closed the distance between them, her hands gripping his lapels. "Tell me the truth. For once, just tell me the truth." The desperate plea in her voice undid him. Anthony's hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him as his mouth claimed hers with all the hunger he'd been suppressing. Chloe responded immediately, her body arching into his, her lips parting on a soft moan that ignited his blood. The small security desk proved inadequate as papers scattered to the floor. Anthony lifted Chloe onto it, his hands tangling in her, hair as years of restraint shattered. Their passion was frantic, desperate, a physical conversation expressing everything they couldn't say aloud. Afterward, as they hastily straightened their clothing, the reality of what had just happened hung between them. "This doesn't change anything," Anthony said, rebuilding his walls even as he spoke. "You're still leaving. And you're still pushing me away. Without explanation." Chloe's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't understand you, Anthony. One minute you treat me like I'm nothing. The next you're secretly paying for my mother's treatment. You look at me like I'm everything you want. Then you act like I'm nothing you need." The raw honesty of her words stripped away Anthony's defenses. Against all better judgment, he found himself speaking the truth he'd hidden for 30 years. The words scraped his throat raw as he forced them out, a confession he'd never voluntarily made to anyone. "I can't give you what you deserve," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't give you children, Chloe. I've been infertile since my 20s. It's why my marriage ended, why I've turned myself into—" He gestured vaguely at himself, at the empire he'd built as compensation. "This—" Understanding dawned in Chloe's eyes, followed by a tenderness that made Anthony look away. "You think that's why I would love you?" she whispered, her hand gently, turning his face back to hers. "Because of your ability to father children?" The word love hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly. "Eventually, it always matters," Anthony said, the bitterness of experience coloring his words. Chloe shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "You've spent so long testing everyone else's character, you've forgotten to examine your own assumptions." She stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm between them. "I'm still leaving for London. But not because you can't father children, Anthony, because you won't let anyone close enough to love the man behind the empire." She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "Thank you for helping my mother. It means more than you know." And then she was gone, leaving Anthony alone with the uncomfortable truth that his greatest fear wasn't rejection because of his infertility. It was acceptance despite it, and all the vulnerability that would entail. Chapter 6. Enemy's Circle. The autumn air carried a bitter chill as Anthony stared at the tabloid headlines plastered across his desk. The words seemed to pulse with malicious glee. Gibbons shooting blanks. Billionaire CEO's secret shame revealed. The accompanying article detailed his infertility diagnosis, complete with medical terminology and speculation about how it had affected his business decisions over the decades. "How?" he asked Miranda, who stood ashen-faced before him. Victoria, she answered, referring to his ex-wife. She sold the story to 6 different outlets. They've all published this morning. Anthony's jaw clenched. Victoria had known his deepest secret, the one vulnerability he couldn't overcome with money or power. She had promised discretion in their divorce settlement 20 years ago. Now she had weaponized his shame, carefully timed to coincide with Gibbons Global's upcoming public offering. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting," Miranda continued. "The stock is already down 12 points in pre-market trading." Anthony nodded, his expression giving away nothing of the humiliation and rage churning inside him. "Schedule it for noon, and get my lawyers on the phone." As Miranda left, Anthony's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the content made the sender's identity unmistakable. "I just saw the news. Are you okay?" See. The simple gesture of concern from Chloe, despite everything, momentarily steadied him. Before he could decide whether to respond, his private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Chloe herself, breathless as if she'd rushed over. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, stepping cautiously into his office. "I tried calling, but Miranda said you weren't taking calls." Anthony stood frozen, unprepared for her presence. She looked beautiful as always, but with a softness in her expression he hadn't seen since before the retreat. "How did you get up here?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "I still have the security badge you never asked me to return." She approached his desk, eyeing the tabloids spread across it. "I came as soon as I saw the headlines. This is Victoria's doing, isn't it?" The fact that she remembered his ex-wife's name from their few personal conversations touched something in Anthony. Yes. He turned away, unable to bear her seeing him so exposed. Perfect timing, too. She still owns shares in Gibbons Global. The stock plummet will trigger her golden parachute clause. Chloe moved to stand beside him at the window. "I'm so sorry, Anthony. This kind of public exposure is cruel." "It's business," he said flatly, though they both knew it was more personal than that. "What can I do?" she asked simply. The question caught him off guard. She owed him nothing, less than nothing after how he'd treated her. Yet here she was, offering support when everyone else would be calculating how to distance themselves from the scandal. Before Anthony could respond, his phone rang with his head of PR. He gestured for Chloe to stay as he answered on speakerphone. "The shack. Press is swarming the building," the PR director reported. "We need a statement immediately. Something that turns this from a weakness into a strength. Maybe emphasize your focus on business without family distractions, or announce a major adoption initiative for the corporate foundation." Anthony felt physically ill at the suggestion of exploiting his condition for PR. Beside him, Chloe's expression darkened. "Do nothing until I arrive," she said suddenly, leaning toward the speakerphone. "Who is this?" the PR director demanded. "Chloe." "Tryon," Anthony answered, a sudden decision crystallizing. "My crisis management consultant. Follow her instructions." After ending the call, he turned to find Chloe staring at him in disbelief. "I'm not a crisis manager, Anthony." "You're the only person I trust right now," he admitted, the words feeling like they were torn from his chest. "Will you help me?" Something shifted in her expression, the professional distance giving way to the warmth he'd first glimpsed during the retreat. "Yes," she said simply, "but we do this my way. No spin, no distraction tactics, just truth." Within hours, Chloe had orchestrated a response that stunned both the media and Anthony's board. Rather than hiding from reporters, Anthony walked out of Gibbons Tower at her side, facing the press pack directly. "Yes, I am infertile," he stated, his voice steady as Chloe stood supportively at his shoulder. "I've known since my 20s. It's a medical condition, not a moral failing. It's also nobody's business but my own, which is why I'll be filing invasion of privacy lawsuits against all publications that printed my medical history without consent. Beside him, Chloe fielded follow-up questions with graceful authority, deflecting the more invasive ones and allowing through those that humanized rather than sensationalized the issue. As cameras flashed around them, a reporter shouted above, "The din, Mr. Gibbons, is this why you've never remarried, never had children?" Anthony felt Chloe stiffen beside him. Before he could formulate a response, another reporter pushed forward. "Is this exotic beauty your new girlfriend? Has she accepted your condition?" Anthony instinctively stepped in front of Chloe, shielding her from the cameras. "This press conference is over," he announced, guiding her back toward the building entrance. Inside the private elevator, Chloe exhaled shakily. "Well, that went as well as could be expected." "Thank you," Anthony said quietly, "for standing with me out there." She smiled, the sight warming him from within. That's what friends do. The word friends felt simultaneously too much and not enough. Back in his office, they found Miranda waiting with grim news. "Photographers ambushed Ms. Tryon's mother at the hospital," she reported. "They're asking about her mysterious lottery win and relationship to you." Chloe paled. "My mother is still recovering from her first round of treatment. She can't handle this kind of stress." Anthony's protective instinct surged. "I'll have security assigned to her immediately, and I'll issue a cease and desist through my legal team." "That won't stop them," Chloe said, pacing anxiously. "The tabloids will just dig deeper, connect more dots." She was right. Once the press sensed a story, they would pursue it relentlessly. They would discover Anthony's anonymous donation to her mother's treatment, speculate about their relationship, drag Chloe into a spotlight she never asked for, all because she had stood beside him today. A cold certainty settled in Anthony's chest. There was only one way to protect her now. "Go to London," he said quietly. "Take the Harrington position. Leave immediately." Chloe stopped pacing, staring at him with dawning comprehension. "You're pushing me away. Again." "I'm protecting you," Anthony corrected. "The media will destroy anyone close to me right now. They'll twist your kindness into calculation, paint you as a gold digger or worse. I don't care what they say about me, but I do." The intensity of his response surprised them both. "Your reputation, your business, your mother's peace, all of it matters to me." Chloe approached him slowly. "Then let me stay. Let me help you. Fight this." The temptation to accept her offer nearly overwhelmed Anthony's resolve, but the memory of paparazzi harassing her mother steeled his determination. "I need you to go," he said firmly, "for your own sake." "Anthony, please," he interrupted, the word foreign on his lips. "I can weather this storm alone. I've been doing it for decades." The sadness in her eyes cut him deeply. "That's just it," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to." For a moment, they stood in silence, the air between them heavy with words unsaid. Then Chloe nodded, accepting his decision, even as disappointment shadowed her features. "I'll make arrangements to leave by the end of the week," she said quietly. "But Anthony, pushing people away won't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll face it alone." After she left, Anthony made the hardest decision of his life. To ensure Chloe's complete protection from the media storm, he needed to sever any perceived connection between them publicly and irrevocably. That evening, he allowed himself to be photographed at an exclusive restaurant with Vanessa Moore, a famous model known for her discretion and transactional approach to relationships with powerful men. The photos, showing him whispering intimately in Vanessa's ear, appeared in every tabloid the next morning. Anthony didn't need to see the headlines to know they had achieved their purpose. The text message from Chloe confirmed it. "I see you've moved on. I hope she makes you happy. Goodbye, Anthony." The message contained no anger, no accusations, just a finality that left him hollow. As anticipated, The press immediately lost interest in Chloe, focusing instead on speculating about his new relationship. The pain of knowing he had hurt her, again, was excruciating, but it was the price of her freedom from the scandal he couldn't escape. In time, she would understand he had done it to protect her. In time, perhaps she would forgive him, or perhaps not. Perhaps this final betrayal would extinguish whatever warmth she had still felt for him. Perhaps that was for the best. 2 days later, Anthony received confirmation from his security team that Chloe had boarded a flight to London. As her plane crossed the Atlantic, taking her further from him with each passing minute, Anthony stood alone in his penthouse, staring at a painting he'd purchased anonymously from the Children's Hospital fundraiser. A bright, hopeful rendering of a family, created by one of Chloe's young students. For the first time in 30 years, Anthony Gibbons allowed himself to weep for everything he had lost and everything he had deliberately pushed away. Chapter 7. Desperate Measures. 3 months stretched into an eternity for Anthony. The infertility scandal gradually faded from headlines as the public found new celebrities to scrutinize, but the damage to his personal life remained absolute. His staged relationship with Vanessa Moore had ended after serving its purpose, leaving him more isolated than ever. Each morning, Anthony checked Tryon Events' website, noting the impressive new clients Chloe had secured in London. Each night, he drafted messages to her that he never sent. The board had stabilized, the stock had recovered, but Anthony himself remained hollowed out, functioning on autopilot through business acquisitions and executive meetings. "Sir," Miranda interrupted his thoughts one morning, "Ms. Tryon's mother has been readmitted to Meadowbrook. Her condition has deteriorated significantly." Anthony's head snapped up. "When?" "Yesterday. According to my sources, Ms. Tryon is flying in from London tonight." He was already reaching for his coat. "Cancel my meetings for the next 3 days." "Already done," Miranda replied with a knowing smile. "And I've instructed the hospital administrator to give you full updates on Professor Tryon's condition." At the hospital, Anthony stayed in the shadows, ensuring his substantial resources were discreetly deployed for the elder Tryon's care while avoiding any personal appearance that might attract media attention. For 2 days, he monitored her condition remotely, learning that she required immediate surgery with significant risks. On the 3rd day, Anthony received word that Chloe had arrived. Unable to resist, he positioned himself in an alcove near the surgical waiting area, watching as she paced anxiously while her mother underwent the critical procedure. She looked thinner than he remembered, her usual vibrancy dimmed by worry. The sight of her, so close yet unreachable, was exquisite torture. As the hours stretched on, Anthony watched her reject calls from colleagues, check her watch repeatedly, and eventually curl into an uncomfortable waiting room chair, exhaustion finally claiming her. Without conscious decision, Anthony found himself approaching her sleeping form. He removed his suit jacket and gently draped it over her, the familiar scent of her perfume sending a jolt through his system. As he carefully tucked the jacket around her shoulders, Chloe stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded her features. Then recognition dawned, followed by a complicated mixture of emotions Anthony couldn't fully interpret. "Anthony." Her voice was husky with sleep. "What are you doing here?" He straightened, maintaining some distance. "I heard about your mother. I wanted to make sure she has the best care." Another anonymous donation. The question held no bitterness, just weary resignation. Something like that. Anthony hesitated, then asked, "How is she?" Chloe sat up, still clutching his jacket around her. "Critical but stable. The doctors are optimistic, but the next 48 hours are crucial." She studied him with those perceptive eyes that always seemed to see through his defenses. You look terrible. The unexpected observation startled a short laugh from Anthony. Thank you. I mean it, you've lost weight. There are new lines around your eyes. She tilted her head. Are you sleeping at all? The genuine concern in her voice threatened to unravel what remained of his composure. I've been busy with Vanessa. More? The question was quiet, but it landed like a blow. That was... Anthony paused, searching for words. A distraction for the press, nothing more. Understanding flickered in Chloe's eyes, followed by hurt. You staged it to protect me from the media? Yes. She was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. You broke my heart to protect my reputation? The raw vulnerability in her question shattered something in Anthony. He sank into the chair beside her, suddenly bone-weary. I break everything I touch, Chloe. It's who I am. To his surprise, she reached out, her warm fingers wrapping around his cold ones. No. It's who you've convinced yourself to be. Before Anthony could respond, a doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway. Ms. Tryon, your mother is out of surgery. She's asking for you. Chloe stood immediately, relief washing over her features. She handed Anthony his jacket, their fingers brushing in a moment of electric connection. I need to go to her. Of course. She took a few steps, then turned back. Will you still be here when I come back? The hope in her voice undid him. If you want me to be. I do. Those two simple words, words Anthony had never expected to hear from her again, resonated through his entire being. For the next 2 days, they established a tentative truce in the neutral territory of the hospital. Anthony arranged for a private waiting room with comfortable furniture, ensured excellent food was delivered, and maintained a discreet security presence to keep away photographers. They talked carefully around the most painful subjects, focusing instead on her work in London, his latest business ventures, and her mother's improving condition. On the third evening, as Professor Tryon slept peacefully after being moved from intensive care, Chloe and Anthony shared take-out Thai food in the private waiting room. When do you return to London? Anthony asked, dreading the answer. Next week. Chloe set down her chopsticks. My team has been managing without me, but I need to get back. The thought of her leaving again was physically painful. Anthony struggled to maintain his neutral expression, but something must have shown in his eyes. Unless I had a reason to stay, she added softly. The unspoken question hung between them. Anthony set down his food, his appetite vanishing. Chloe, he began, unsure how to continue. Just tell me the truth, Anthony. Do you want me to stay? More than I've wanted anything in my life, he admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. But I can't ask that of you. Why not? Because I can't give you what you deserve. A family, children. Chloe moved to sit beside him, close, enough that he could feel her warmth. You're still hung up on that, after everything else we've been through? It's not something that changes, Anthony said, the familiar bitterness seeping into his voice. It's who I am, who I'll always be. And you think that defines your worth? Your capacity to be loved? Chloe shook her head. For someone so brilliant in business, you can be remarkably obtuse about matters of the heart. Before Anthony could form a response, she continued, her voice growing passionate. Do you know what I've learned in London? That success means nothing without someone to share it with. That I'd rather have a life with you, complicated, difficult you, than any number of children with someone else. The raw honesty of her declaration left Anthony speechless. Chloe reached up, her hand gently cupping his cheek. I'm not saying it would be easy, she said softly, but nothing worth having ever is. In that moment, looking into her eyes, Anthony, Gibbons, the Iceman, the ruthless billionaire, the man who had everything and nothing, felt something inside him finally, irrevocably break free. Stay, he whispered, covering her hand with his own. Not for a week or a month. Stay for good. Marry me, Chloe. I can't promise you children of your own blood, but I can promise you everything else. My name, my fortune, my soul. We can adopt. Use surrogates, anything you want. The desperate plea surprised them both. Chloe's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. Anthony, I know it's sudden, he continued, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. I know my reputation, my age, my condition. None of it makes me a suitable partner. But I love you. God help me. I love you more than I thought possible. It was the first time he'd ever said those words to anyone. They hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable and irrevocable. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, but before she could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Miss Tryon, your mother is awake and asking for you both. The moment suspended between them, neither willing to break the fragile connection. Finally, Chloe stood, extending her hand to Anthony. We'll finish this conversation, she promised, her voice thick with emotion. But right now, my mother wants to meet the man who's twice saved her life. Anthony took her hand, allowing her to lead him toward a future he'd never dared to imagine, one where his frozen heart might finally completely thaw. Chapter 8. The Bargain. 2 years, Chloe said firmly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight, streaming through the hospital window. Before we consider children, we focus on us for 2 years. Anthony studied her face, searching for hesitation or doubt. They sat in her mother's hospital room, the sleeping woman's steady breathing providing rhythmic background to their whispered conversation. Her unexpected condition for accepting his proposal had caught him completely off guard. Why? He asked, genuinely puzzled. Most women would be eager to start a family immediately, especially given his age and wealth. Chloe took his hand, tracing the lines on his palm with gentle fingers. Because I want you to be certain that I'm marrying you for you, Anthony, not for your name or your fortune or the family we might create. Her eyes met his, unflinching in their honesty. And I want to be certain that you're not marrying me because you're desperate for an heir. The insight pierced him with its accuracy. Was that what had driven his impulsive proposal? The lifelong desire for legacy, for continuation? I love you, he said simply, the words still new and strange on his tongue. I know, she replied, her smile softening the serious moment. But love and desperation can be difficult to untangle. 2 years gives us time to build something that's just ours, before we consider bringing children into it. Anthony considered her condition, surprised by the relief he felt. 2 years to simply be with her, to learn her rhythms and preferences, to discover what it meant to be a partner rather than merely a provider. Agreed, he said, lifting her hand to his lips. 2 years, just us. 3 weeks later, they stood together at Anthony's lake house, exchanging vows beneath an ancient oak tree, with only Chloe's recovering mother and Miranda as witnesses. Anthony had offered a lavish ceremony, but Chloe had preferred intimacy over spectacle. His relief at avoiding a media circus had been immense. I take you, Chloe Tryon, as my wife, Anthony said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. To share my life, my name, my heart, everything I am and everything I have. Chloe's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she repeated her own vows, the simple gold band sliding onto his finger, feeling simultaneously foreign and right. The honeymoon in Bali was a revelation for them both. Away from the pressures of business and society, Anthony discovered a capacity for joy he'd thought long extinguished. They explored ancient temples, swam in pristine waters, and spent languorous days learning each other's bodies with increasing intimacy. I've never seen you laugh like this, Chloe observed one evening. As they watched the sunset from their private villa, Anthony realized with surprise that she was right. I don't think I knew how anymore, he admitted. Until you. But their return to reality brought fresh challenges. The media swarmed for details of their sudden marriage, speculation running wild about Chloe's motives. Gold digger strikes jackpot, screamed one tabloid, featuring unflattering photos of Chloe leaving a medical building for her mother's checkup. At Gibbons Global, Anthony's board questioned his judgment, suggesting thinly veiled concerns about Chloe's influence. Several members openly wondered if the marriage indicated Anthony's imminent retirement, triggering stock fluctuations that required his constant attention. Meanwhile, Chloe struggled to define her new role. She'd built her career on independence and professional respect, but as Mrs. Gibbons, doors opened differently, sometimes too easily, sometimes not at all. "I'm not giving up my company," she insisted during a tense dinner at their penthouse. "I've worked too hard to build it." "I would never ask you to," Anthony assured her, though privately he worried about the strain of her transcontinental commute to maintain London operations. The compromise came in the form of the Gibbons Foundation for Children's Futures, which Chloe established with Anthony's backing but her own vision. Focusing on art therapy programs for critically ill children, the foundation allowed her to channel her passion while maintaining her business separately. For 6 months, they navigated their new life together with cautious optimism. Then came the gala that would test everything they'd built. "It's for children's cancer research," Chloe explained, reviewing the invitation. "The foundation should have a presence." Anthony agreed, though public appearances still made him wary after the infertility scandal. The night arrived, with all. The glittering spectacle of New York high society, cameras flashing as they entered the venue arm in arm. Mrs. Gibbons greeted Eliza Harrington, wife of Anthony's chief competitor and known for her vicious social maneuvers. "How brave of you to appear tonight." Chloe's smile remained perfectly pleasant. "Brave?" "Well, yes," Eliza continued, her voice carrying just enough to attract nearby attention. "Supporting children's causes when everyone knows about Anthony's condition. It must be so difficult knowing you'll never have your own." Anthony felt Chloe stiffen beside him, her hand tightening on his arm. Before he could intervene, she responded with quiet dignity. "What I know, Mrs. Harrington, is that family comes in many forms. Anthony and I are fortunate enough to have the resources to help many children, not just the hypothetical ones you seem so concerned about." The elegant reply silenced Eliza momentarily, but the damage was done. Throughout the evening, Anthony noticed the whispers, the sidelong glances directed at Chloe. His protective instinct surged, but Chloe held her ground with impressive grace. Until the moment he overheard a conversation never meant for his ears. "She's nothing but the black girl warming an old man's bed until she collects her inheritance," sneered Lawrence Pembroke, a banking executive Anthony had outmaneuvered years ago. "Clever of her to marry an infertile billionaire, all the money, none of the stretch marks." Something primitive and violent rose in Anthony at the racial undertone and crude dismissal of his wife's character. Without conscious thought, he approached Pembroke's group, his expression deadly calm. "Mr. Pembroke," he said quietly, causing the man to pale visibly, "I believe you were discussing my wife." "Gibbons, I was merely expressing opinions that will cost you dearly," Anthony finished for him, his voice dropping to a register that had made grown men tremble for decades. "By Monday morning, your bank's trading privileges with Gibbons Global subsidiaries will be revoked. Your personal investments through our financial arm will be liquidated at market open. And your daughter's application to Princeton, currently being considered thanks to your generous alumni donation, will suddenly face unexpected scrutiny when the admissions committee receives an anonymous package detailing her actual SAT scores versus those submitted." Pembroke's face drained of all color. "You can't—" "I absolutely can," Anthony interrupted, his smile terrifying in its gentleness. and I'll dismantle everything you've built piece by piece if I ever hear you've spoken. My wife's name again. Are we clear?" The confrontation ended with Pembroke's hasty departure, but the victory felt hollow when Anthony turned to find Chloe watching from nearby, her expression unreadable. "We're leaving," he said, taking her elbow. In the sanctuary of their limousine, Chloe finally spoke. That was utterly terrifying. Anthony stared out the window, still battling the rage coursing through him. "He deserved worse." "Perhaps," she agreed softly. "But destroying a man's career and his daughter's future over a crude comment? Anthony, that's not proportional response. That's vindictive cruelty." Her words cut through his anger, forcing self-examination. He'd avoided for decades. "No one disrespects you like that. No one." "I've faced worse," Chloe said, her calm acceptance somehow more disturbing than the original insult. "Being a black woman in predominantly white spaces means developing a thick skin, Anthony. I appreciated your defense, but the scorched earth approach, that frightened me." The admission pierced him deeply. "I frightened you?" "Not you," she clarified, reaching for his hand. "Your reaction, the coldness in your eyes, like you could obliterate someone without feeling anything at all." Anthony stared at their intertwined fingers, the contrast of her warm brown skin against his pale hand. "I've spent 30 years perfecting that coldness," he admitted. "It became my shield after the infertility diagnosis. If no one could hurt me, no one could reject me for being less than a complete man." The raw honesty of his confession hung between them. Chloe moved closer, her head resting on his shoulder. "The man I married is many things," she said quietly. "Brilliant, complicated, sometimes maddening, but less than complete has never been one of them." She looked up, holding his gaze. "Your infertility is a medical condition, Anthony. Not a character flaw, not a moral failing, and certainly not a reflection of your worth or masculinity." Something cracked open in Anthony's chest, a wound festering for 30 years, finally exposed to healing air. "Victoria didn't see it that way," he whispered, naming his ex-wife for the first time since their marriage. "She said I'd cheated her out of her birthright as a woman, that I was defective." Chloe's expression hardened. "Then Victoria was cruel and wrong, and you've been carrying her judgment as if it were truth for far too long." In the privacy of their penthouse that night, Chloe led Anthony to their bedroom with gentle determination. With patient hands and whispered affirmations, she systematically dismantled the shame he'd carried for decades, rewriting his understanding of his own body with reverence rather than disappointment. "You are enough," she whispered against his skin as they moved together. "You have always been enough." In the aftermath, holding Chloe's sleeping form against his chest, Anthony Gibbons, feared corporate raider, the notorious Iceman, felt something fundamental shift within him. The frozen core of shame that had dictated his decisions for 30 years began to thaw under the persistent warmth of his wife's acceptance. The next morning, Anthony made an unprecedented decision. He cleared his schedule for 2 weeks and asked Chloe to do the same. "Why?" she asked, surprised by the spontaneity, so unlike his usual methodical planning. "Because I need help," he said simply, the admission costing him more than any business deal ever had. "I need to understand why I became the man who would destroy someone for a crude comment. Why I've built my identity around coldness and control." Chloe's smile was radiant with pride. "Are you suggesting therapy, Mr. Gibbons?" "I'm suggesting I'm tired of being feared instead of loved," he replied, taking her hand. "And I need to be worthy of what you see in me." The intensive 2-week therapeutic retreat became the foundation for a new chapter in their marriage. Anthony confronted decades of buried pain, tracing his patterns of control and intimidation to the original wound of his infertility diagnosis and subsequent rejection. "Your worth was never tied to your ability to reproduce," his therapist emphasized repeatedly, "but you accepted that judgment and built your entire identity around compensating for what you perceived as fundamental brokenness." Slowly, painfully, Anthony began to dismantle the walls he'd constructed around his heart. And as winter gave way to spring, the Iceman's legendary frost continued its gradual, imperfect thaw. Chapter 9. Medical Miracle. Cherry blossoms adorned the lake house on their first anniversary as Anthony surprised Chloe with a recreation of their wedding ceremony. Their intimate circle had expanded slightly. Chloe's recovered mother, Miranda, whose loyalty never wavered, and Claude, who brought several children from the hospital program that now flourished under their foundation. 1 year, Anthony murmured, against Chloe's hair as they danced beneath twinkling lights. "The best of my life. Still 11 months until our bargain is complete," she teased, eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm in no rush," he replied truthfully. Therapy had transformed his perspective. Children were no longer validation of his worth or necessary for his legacy. The partnership with Chloe fulfilled him more deeply than he'd thought possible. As their second year unfolded, Anthony occasionally caught Chloe watching children at foundation events with quiet longing in her eyes. "Have you ever wondered," she asked one evening, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond their penthouse windows, "if medical science might have advanced since your initial diagnosis?" Anthony looked up, surprised. "My condition is permanent, Chloe. The doctors were quite clear." 30 years ago," she replied gently. "Medicine has made remarkable advances since then. That seed of possibility took root, not because Anthony needed children to feel complete, but because he recognized Chloe's unspoken desire." 2 months before their second anniversary, Anthony met with Dr. Eleanor Chen, the world's foremost specialist in male reproductive health. "I don't want to raise her hopes unnecessarily," he explained, "but if there's even a slight chance..." After reviewing his records, Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral. The original diagnosis wasn't incorrect, but it was incomplete by today's standards. She explained his condition, obstructive azoospermia from a youthful injury, had been considered untreatable decades ago. Now we have microsurgical techniques that might retrieve viable sperm directly from the reproductive tract. "The chances?" Anthony asked, automatically calculating probabilities. "Less than 2% given the duration and severity," she answered honestly. "But not impossible." That sliver of possibility was enough. That evening, Anthony shared everything with Chloe, emphasizing the overwhelming likelihood of failure. 2% is better than 0, she said, eyes shining. "But Anthony, understand this. I want to try because creating life together would be beautiful, not because I need it to be happy with you. If this fails, we'll build our family through adoption or surrogacy, and I'll never regret choosing you." The procedures forged a new intimacy between them. For Anthony, the experience was humbling, a stark contrast to the control he maintained elsewhere in life. Chloe's quiet strength sustained him through uncomfortable examinations and painful extractions. The process stripped away pretenses. As Anthony underwent his procedures, Chloe began hormone treatments to prepare her body. They shared side effects and tentative hopes in a dance of mutual vulnerability. "We've managed to retrieve a single viable sample," Dr. Chen finally announced. "It's enough for one attempt at our most advanced fertilization technique." The day their genetic materials were combined brought tense, fragile hope. 3 days later, they learned 2 embryos had developed successfully. "Twins run in my family," Chloe mentioned softly. "My mother is a twin, so was my grandmother." Anthony found himself imagining their children for the first time without pain, perhaps with Chloe's expressive eyes or radiant smile. The embryo transfer was anticlimactic, a brief procedure belying its momentous potential. At home, they began the agonizing 2-week wait. "Whatever happens," Chloe whispered that night against his chest, "we already have our miracle. You've become the man you were always meant to be." The first pregnancy test was negative. They shielded each other from disappointment, both claiming they had expected this outcome. The second test confirmed failure. The embryos hadn't implanted. Dr. Chen remained compassionate. "We knew the odds were extremely low. Take time to process before considering other options. Donor sperm, adoption, surrogacy." That evening, they sat in silence watching sunset over the lake. Anthony held Chloe's hand as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his own grief thick in his throat. Chloe turned to him, eyes fierce despite her tears. "Don't you dare apologize. We took a chance against impossible odds. That's not failure, that's courage." In the weeks that followed, they researched adoption agencies, focusing on older children who waited longest for homes. The foundation work continued, bringing fulfillment as they reimagined their future family. On their second anniversary, Anthony surprised Chloe with adoption application papers for 3 siblings, ages 6, 8, and 10, who had been in foster care for years. "They need a home," he said simply. "We have so much to give." Chloe's radiant smile confirmed they were on the right path. That night, they celebrated their evolving definition of family with passionate abandon, their connection deeper for having weathered disappointment together. 6 weeks later, during a board meeting, Chloe suddenly paled and rushed from the room. Anthony found her in the executive washroom, visibly shaken. "Call Dr. Chen," she said, voice trembling. "Something's wrong. I'm having cramps and I'm late, very late." Heart pounding with fear for her health, Anthony immediately summoned their physician. Hours later, in their penthouse, they received impossible news. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Gibbons," the doctor confirmed, looking nearly as shocked as they felt. "Approximately 6 weeks along." "That's impossible," Anthony insisted. "The embryo transfer failed. Sometimes after fertility treatments, the body responds in unexpected ways," the doctor explained carefully. "The procedures may have cleared a previously undetected blockage, or the hormones might have created optimal conditions." Chloe squeezed Anthony's hand. "Is the baby healthy?" "Babies," corrected the doctor, turning the ultrasound screen toward them. 2 distinct heartbeats, twins. 2 tiny flickering lights pulsed with insistent life on the screen. Children Anthony had never thought possible, conceived naturally after all medical interventions had failed. "Medicine isn't perfect," the doctor admitted with a small smile. "The body's capacity for healing sometimes surprises even us." Later that night, as Chloe slept peacefully beside him, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen, Anthony found himself overwhelmed. He had spent 30 years defining himself by what he couldn't do, by what he couldn't give. Now, against all expectations, life had found a way. He placed his hand gently beside Chloe's, marveling at the miracle. Beneath their fingers, 2 hearts beating where he had believed nothing could grow. 2 lives created through love, perseverance, and perhaps a touch of the impossible. For the first time since his diagnosis at 20, Anthony Gibbons slept without the weight of inadequacy. The Iceman had completely melted, replaced by a man who had discovered that sometimes the most precious gifts arrive after you've stopped measuring your worth by what you can or cannot give. Chapter 10. Everything and More. The news of Chloe's pregnancy transformed Anthony in ways neither could have anticipated. The man once known as the Iceman became consumed with tender protectiveness, researching everything about prenatal care with the same intensity he once devoted to corporate takeovers. "You've read 17 books on pregnancy in 2 weeks," Chloe laughed one evening, finding him surrounded by medical journals. The babies won't be here for months. I need to be prepared, Anthony replied, his expression serious yet vulnerable. There are variables I can't control. That admission of vulnerability, of limitations, would have been impossible for the Anthony of before. Chloe touched his face gently, understanding the complex emotions beneath his preparations. Some things can't be managed like business acquisitions, she said softly. That's what makes them beautiful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly until the 5th month, when routine testing revealed complications. The babies were developing properly, but Chloe's blood pressure had begun creeping dangerously high. Preeclampsia requires close monitoring, her obstetrician explained, particularly with twin pregnancies. Anthony immediately rearranged his entire life around her care. Board meetings moved to their penthouse. The foundation's operations were restructured. For the first time in his career, Anthony Gibbons put something ahead of business without hesitation. You don't need to hover quite so much, Chloe protested when she caught him checking her blood pressure for the 3rd time one day. The doctor said, I'm stable as long as I rest. Humor me, Anthony replied, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Please. The uncharacteristic plea revealed his deeper fear. Chloe covered his hand with hers. What is it? Really? Anthony's composure wavered, his voice unsteady. For 30 years I believed I couldn't have children. Now that miracle has happened, but I could lose you all. I can't. He stopped, emotion overwhelming him. I can't lose you, Chloe. Not for anything. The raw fear in his eyes pierced her heart. Chloe pulled him close, his head resting against her swollen belly where their children grew. Listen to me, Anthony Gibbons, she said fiercely. I am not going anywhere. We're fighters, all 3 of us. Whatever happens, we face it together. As the pregnancy progressed into the 7th month, Chloe's condition deteriorated despite all precautions. After a particularly frightening episode that sent them rushing to the hospital at midnight, her doctor delivered sobering news. We need to deliver the babies now, he advised. At 30 weeks, they'll be premature but viable. The danger to Chloe now outweighs the benefits of continuing the pregnancy. Anthony felt the world shift beneath him. What are the risks? He asked, his businessman's mind desperately seeking data, anything to make sense of the situation. For the babies, typical preemie challenges. For Chloe, if we don't deliver soon, seizures, stroke, organ failure. The stark choice stripped away all of Anthony's carefully constructed control. For the first time since childhood, he found himself praying, to what or whom he wasn't certain, just desperate pleas for the safety of his wife and children. The night before the scheduled C-section, Anthony sat beside Chloe's hospital bed, holding her hand as monitors beeped reassuringly around them. I need you to promise me something, Chloe said, her voice calm despite the gravity of their situation. Anything. If there are complications, if a choice must be made, you tell them to save the babies. Anthony's grip tightened painfully on her hand. Don't ask that of me. I have to, she insisted. These children are our miracle, Anthony, our legacy of love against impossible odds. You're my miracle, he countered, his voice breaking. Everything I have, my name, my fortune, my soul, means nothing without you. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, but her resolve remained steady. Promise me. Unable to speak the words, Anthony simply nodded, pressing his lips to her knuckles in silent promise. That night, he didn't leave her side, watching her sleep as monitors tracked the heartbeats of their unborn children. Morning arrived with a flurry of medical preparation. As they wheeled Chloe toward the operating room, Anthony walked alongside, still holding her hand. I love you, he said, the words now natural and essential on his tongue, more than anything in this world. I know, she replied with a serene smile. That's why we'll all be fine. The surgical team was the best money could secure. Specialists, flown in from 3 continents, equipment so advanced it wasn't yet available to the general public. None of it eased the terror in Anthony's heart as they administered Chloe's spinal block and raised the surgical curtain. When invited to take his place beside her head, Anthony froze momentarily at the threshold of the operating room. Everything that mattered to him, his entire world, was in this sterile room. "Mr. Gibbons," prompted a nurse gently, "your wife needs you." Those simple words broke his paralysis. Anthony moved to Chloe's side, taking her hand as the procedure began. "Talk to me," she whispered, eyes anxious above her surgical mask. "Distract me." So Anthony did what he'd never done before, opened his heart completely, whispering their story as surgeons worked urgently behind the curtain. He described how she'd challenged him at their first meeting, how her integrity had confounded his cynical tests, how her compassion with the hospital children had first cracked his frozen heart. "You saved me," he told her as the surgical team's movements became more intense, their voices taking on greater urgency, "not by giving me children, but by showing me I was always worthy of love." Alarms suddenly blared, and the calm efficiency of the operating room transformed into controlled chaos. "Blood pressure dropping," called a nurse sharply. "She's hemorrhaging," announced the surgeon. "Get him out of here." Anthony refused to leave, his grip on Chloe's hand tightening as her eyes fluttered closed. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking. "Chloe, please, stay with me." In that sterile operating room, surrounded by beeping monitors and urgent medical voices, Anthony Gibbons, who had built empires and toppled competitors without blinking, found himself utterly powerless, reduced to desperate prayers to a god he'd ignored for decades. The next hours passed in nightmarish blur. Anthony found himself in a surgical waiting room, surrounded by the most advanced medical minds money could assemble, all delivering variations of the same message. They were doing everything possible. In his desperation, Anthony made wild promises to the universe, his entire fortune for their survival, every possession, every achievement sacrificed willingly if only Chloe and their children would live. 4 hours after Chloe had been rushed back into surgery, a tired doctor finally approached. "Mr. Gibbons," he began solemnly, causing Anthony's heart to stutter in his chest, "your wife experienced severe complications, postpartum hemorrhage, followed by a dangerous clotting disorder. It was touch and go for a while. Anthony couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. But," the doctor continued, a smile finally breaking through his exhaustion, "she's stable now. She's a fighter. Probably the strongest patient I've ever treated." Relief crashed through Anthony with such force that his knees nearly buckled. "And the babies? A boy and a girl, as you knew, premature but remarkably robust for 30 weeks. They'll need NICU care, but all indicators are positive." The world that had narrowed to a pinpoint of terror suddenly expanded with blinding possibility. Anthony found himself escorted first to the NICU, where 2 tiny beings with translucent skin and improbable strength gripped his fingers through incubator holes. Their perfect miniature features, delicate eyelashes, tiny fingernails, rosebud, mouths rendered the ruthless billionaire completely undone. "Hello," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father." The words, impossible for so many years, felt like both a prayer and a promise. Later, beside Chloe's bed in the recovery room, Anthony maintained his vigil as she slept, monitors confirming her gradual return to strength. When her eyes finally fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face, he couldn't stop the tears that had been building for hours. "The babies?" she asked immediately, her voice barely audible. "Perfect," he assured her, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. "Absolutely perfect. A boy and a girl, just as the ultrasound showed. Peace settled over her features. You've seen them? Yes. Our son has your mouth. Our daughter already has my scowl. The weak laugh this drew from Chloe was the most beautiful sound Anthony had ever heard. 5 years later, Anthony stood at the edge of the lake, watching as Chloe braided their daughter Amara's dark curls on the dock. Her patient fingers worked through the child's hair, so similar to her own, while nearby their son Elijah splashed cautiously in the shallows under Anthony's watchful eye. "Daddy, look!" Elijah called, his face alight with triumph as he managed to float unassisted for the first time. "I'm doing it. I see you, champion," Anthony replied, his chest swelling with pride unlike anything business success had ever provided. The man once known as the Iceman now spent his days divided between running his empire with new perspective and treasuring the family he'd never thought possible. The foundation he and Chloe had built continued to transform children's lives across 3 continents. Their adoption of the 3 siblings had been finalized the previous year, expanding their family to 7. A number that would have terrified the Anthony of before, but now filled his life with chaotic joy. As the sunset painted the lake in shades of amber and gold, Chloe came to stand beside him, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze to where their twins now played together in the water. Anthony turned to her, taking in the face that had changed everything, the warm eyes that had seen possibility where he'd seen only limitation, the smile that had melted decades of ice. "I was thinking about impossible things," he replied, drawing her closer. "How 5 years ago I would have said this moment couldn't exist." Chloe smiled, understanding the journey they'd traveled. And now, Anthony looked from his wife to their miracle children, these lives born of love and hope against impossible odds. The empire he'd built paled in comparison to the legacy now splashing in the lake before him. "Now I know the truth," he said softly, bending to kiss her with tender reverence. "You didn't just give me babies, Chloe. You gave me life itself."